most men are overwhelmed with emotions. We're culturally programmed to be really inadequate in that area. So actually giving guys a vocabulary, changing the framework. So, and this is where we would get into talking about some of the impacts of the cultural construction of masculinity, which is basically a robot. And that's all unconscious. But you have a conversation with guys and survivors about who are all the models of masculinity we see portrayed in the media, and they very quickly go, yeah, those guys, they're only angry or joking. That's all I ever see. Well, I'm angry, I've got nothing to joke about, I'm angry. When you say, well, see, that's what we've been taught to be as men, but actually, you and I both know there's more to us than that, but how do we get it out? So we actually have the conversation, we reconstruct the idea of being emotional and give it back to the guys as a cognitive framework.
That probably brings me back to the masculinity kind of influence of how that shapes men's lives and responses to difficult thoughts and particularly difficult emotions. I suppose I'm not going to presume in a kind of an emotional literacy for guys. I'm going to check in with them about their different strategies for managing emotions up to now, their ways of managing difficult thoughts when hard times or they've struggled before, what they've done. And so I'm going to really want to centre it in what their experience is to make it relevant for them and their life, and learn from what has been useful or what they're identifying now as no longer useful. Because it's no good me recommending a whole load of things they've already tried and don't work. I think it's understanding that guys, there's often a sense of there's a limited amount of emotions they might display at different times or with different people, and understanding the contextual aspect of that, and how what emotions they identify as difficult and what they identify as kind of okay emotions. I think it's also about explaining some of the physiological aspects of emotional distress, of how you might become overwhelmed. It makes it difficult for you to think when you're physiologically overwhelmed with strong feelings, and emotionally or physically, physiologically quite aroused, how it's difficult to really think straight, but how also men struggle with that and try to want to take control of that, and maybe even almost become frustrated with themselves. So I think so before I get into any sort of mindfulness and breathing and how you might calm yourself or calm your body, I think it's really important to check in what they've had, because often people have their own strategies that they've used. They might go for a walk, they might do a whole load of things which are already about self-care for themselves that you can tap into. So for me that's important. I think that mindfulness is really good. I'm aware that some guys find listening to somebody talking in a very calm, quiet way really hard, particularly if that's the context in which the abuse was, they were emotionally manipulated. So I'm aware that sometimes some just basic breathing for them is really important. Not trying to, not listening to other people telling them how to breathe, or I think I'm aware of things like mindfulness. It's really important often for people to keep their eyes open, to understand, that hypervigilance is something that was really useful for them, might have protected them from harm, and so again to understand what's happening now in the context of what's happened in the past is really important. So then it kind of gives it a kind of, you could say normalises, but at the same time it becomes understandable that this is a reaction I'm having that might parallel an experience I've had in the past. I think it's also really about understanding, that difficult thoughts about self or about others is something maybe to work on when it's going to be useful. That we don't need to work on all thoughts at all times. It might be that we just leave some thoughts to one side, and then put their energy into some looking after ourselves. But then also there's going to be times where you might want to take some time to look at that, where they came from, the kind of reactions you have to those thoughts, and finding ways to manage those, and sort of giving a kind of greater awareness for them. So I think that's again, it's a little bit contextual and I think really particular to who that person is, because I think that's probably one of the most important things for me, is to understand their experience, their context, and what may or may not work for them.
Look, I think feelings of overwhelm will come in a number of different ways. I think it's really important that we talk about how are the ways that they're currently coping with feelings of overwhelm, because my experience is that sometimes the ways they have of coping them may have been very useful to begin with, but may have become problematic in themselves. So I think it's really important to do a very good assessment of what sorts of strategies a person is currently using, and to approach that with a very non-judgmental kind of stance, from a non-judgmental stance, so that we can look at building in and supplementing what they are doing with more healthy, safer options. And hopefully in time that person will then be in a position to be able to drop off some of the least helpful kind of strategies. But I think it is important to let people know that if they're coping, if they're compensating for trauma, if they're trying to deal with feelings of overwhelm, they may be doing things that started off numbing but have possibly become problematic. And to tease that out, is it a problem? Is your drinking, for instance, a problem? Or have you become aggressive with people at work? Is that something that you use to defend yourself? If you feel unsafe, do you instantly go to a position of being aggressive? So what are the ways in which you're currently coping? Are they helping? Rating them as how problematic they are in terms of relationships, that type of thing, and then introducing self-care and nurture and giving permission to even, again, a lot of it's a giving permission thing, because of this idea of a man, the archetype of a man who knows the answers and he can cope and he knows what to do in every situation. So giving permission for them not to know, and for them not to be okay, and not necessarily to be dealing with things very well, and that's okay, because what they've experienced is a very abnormal situation, and it's okay for them to have coped in whatever way they could.
To understand that, how you might manage difficult thoughts, or by numbing or other processes, is really important, because there might be, there's a cultural aspect that maybe in your teens or 20s as young men you went out drinking, and because you went out and got quite drunk, or there's periods where whole times in your life where you can't even remember or anything like that, that may have been useful because it helps manage emotions and helps manage difficult thoughts. But at the same time, there's also to recognise that that's part of men's culture sometimes, as teenage, early 20s, to go out and just get on and do that stuff, and to try drugs and use that's part of a scene, and so one of the things about that is understanding that could be a habit. So sometimes sorting out those ways of managing doesn't mean I need to sort out all the sexual abuse, but stopping doing those things is about stopping a habit, about a behavioural change that I might make. One of the difficulties with that stuff is that sometimes when your way of managing difficult emotions stops, be it going off drugs, alcohol, whatever it is, then you get those memories coming back and you need to find new strategies. So that's that whole thing of don't start taking away one way of managing without actually providing people with other tools for managing stuff. I think it's also understanding that there's other ways of numbing, which is about gambling and porn and other stuff, which again fits with some of that men's culture. And so it's understanding how people could use that for a period of time, But then at other times that then becomes quite problematic. It's understanding those more as problematic behaviours rather than problematic behaviour that can become quite addictive, but at the same time not dealing with it all as about an addiction, but about dealing with a behavioural change, and at the same time supporting people to deal with that past.
We try and take a fairly practical sort of approach. So men are feeling, I think this is true for women too, but men are feeling overwhelmed when the fear of remembering the stuff that happened to them, the fear of the feelings around those memories comes up and makes men anxious that they'll be overwhelmed. So we do quite a bit of psychoeducation around, okay, this is how the mind works in relation to trauma, these are the kinds of effects you can expect. We normalise that, we push hard the message that feelings can't kill you, feelings can't sweep you away. However intense and strong your feelings are, they may very well be very intense, you remain after them. That you're not going to die and you're not going to behave in such a way that... Men are really good at being in control of their feelings. They're really worried that they will lose control. So we point out to them, you've been controlling your stuff for years. You're not going to lose your way in this.
I think the other thing that we want to be able to offer people is some ways of regulating their distress. When that distress feels like it's just random and it's just going all over the place. I think that if the people that we work with can come away with some strategies that they know work, at least temporarily, to ground them, to bring some of that distress level down from that, 9 out of 10 that they're rating it at is down to about a 5 where it's bubbling away, but they can get on with what they have to get on with. I think people want to know that they can function in the world and to have some skills and strategies, and I think there's a whole lot of areas we can work in. I think mindfulness has offered us a whole new area in the last 15 years where we can do some work with distress tolerance and distress recognition and also distress reduction. I think there's lots of lifestyle strategies that we can work with people around. There's relaxation therapy. There's things that can be calibrated within people's relationships, because relationally there can be distress reduction strategies as well. I think if people go away knowing that they have some agency over their own distress, that's going to make a difference too.
Expanding, I think helping to expand the repertoire of emotions, the repertoire of words that accompany those emotions is a really helpful thing. Scaling is useful in that way. Again, the use of metaphor when something is like something else, to give fellows an opportunity to tell stories in their own words, giving them confidence in the fact that they can experience emotions even if they are unable to describe them. That doesn't diminish their experience at all. So I think raising confidence is a useful thing. I do a bit of work on the whiteboard in terms of escalation of anger, in terms of naming feelings at a certain level and looking at ways to manage those feelings, such as frustration or disappointment, rather than letting that escalate very quickly to anger. So looking at the conditions around those feelings and what one can do to settle things. So basically expanding their ability to regulate their emotions, I think, in ways that are accessible, available, that are already incorporated in their daily living. Grounding exercises and mindfulness exercises, I think, are really useful, but a lot of the fellows are very resistant to that. So I think we need to keep it really simple initially, and breathing, simply breathing, is a really useful thing, and doing it in various places. Doesn't have to be alone, in the comfort of your own home, but practicing it standing in a bus queue, or standing in line waiting for a meal, or anything at all that might cause some anxiety or some difficult feelings, to practice it in those circumstances, so that when one is faced with a stronger trigger, a flashback, or one already has those skills on board and can draw on them. So I really emphasise that as something that they need to do, and need to become quite skilled at it. I think some visualisations are really helpful too. A lot of the fellows can access walking through a forest or being out in the surf alone at dawn. A lot of the fellows can access those memories, and I think it's just a useful way to bring those memories forward when others are in the way. Those aren't difficult things to do. People already have those memories on board. They already have those skills. It's just a question, I think, of them rediscovering them and practicing them. So I think it's useful to teach new skills, but I think it's more useful to confirm and help people rediscover skills and things that they are already doing that work well for them anyway, rather than overload them with something new and different. And recognising what they're already doing well.
One of the things that I find very helpful is constantly coming back into the present moment and checking in. Like, if my experience is of a lot of people in general, clients in general, as well as survivors of trauma, they want to tell their stories and they want to understand it. So sometimes what happens is they go into their story too quickly and too soon, and then it triggers a huge amount of emotions either in the session, or they'll later on they'll leave the session and feel flooded by emotions. So one of the things is just educating about the importance of what I call the window of tolerance, Dan Siegel's idea originally, and to kind of check whether what we're talking about, we're going too fast, too deep, and how would you know if you're going too fast and too deep? How would your body tell you? And so it's helping people learn how to track their nervous system and their emotional experience as they're talking. And that is, in a sense, teaching mindfulness skills, to press the pause button and check, okay, where am I on my barometer of overwhelm versus safe and relaxed right now? And if people are recognizing I'm feeling dissociated and I'm spacing out, or I'm feeling anxious, then we use that as a signal to put the story aside. And what I do a lot of is support people to tap into the resources they already have of self-soothing and grounding, and then develop new resources. So that might be, visualizing a safe place, feeling safe places in their body, grounding skills, mindfulness skills. In the somatic experiencing, they call it titrating, which is where you just touch into a little bit of what's difficult at a time, and then you just come out and you check, how was that for you to say that? So we're always kind of coming into the story and then out of it and doing a kind of a check-in. So that's a big thing that is important to me, is tracking and pacing and grading how deep we go. I've made plenty of mistakes in that area, and I've learnt from it that, just one question, tell me about your dad. I've had clients that have just got flooded by just one question, just because it takes them back into traumatic memories. So also me tracking and watching signs of the client looking spaced out or overwhelmed or anxious is important. And my body becomes a good barometer too. If my body will give me information about what's happening for the client. If I'm listening to myself, I'll start to feel something in me that's telling me that we've gone too deep. So I think that's a mixture of, tracking and then teaching different skills to come back into the window of tolerance, come back into the here and now. Yeah.
The conversation will often be around what are the strategies required to feel resilient. So we would talk about self-care strategies. We would talk about things like exercise, making sure they're doing things that they can release some of those strong emotions, but also they can manage some intrusive thoughts or images. So we might talk about the fact that they might drink heavily or misuse drugs or use drugs heavily as ways of masking or having a break from those intrusive thoughts or images. So we have conversations about, are there some other things they can be doing instead of using alcohol or drugs to mask it, to blank out from it, to manage those intrusive thoughts and images. And that would include things like finding novel things to do. Because when we find novel things to do, different things to do, it takes all of our attention. Learning something new, for example. I also spend some time with some men on being mindful, operating more in the present, because most of the time the pain comes from the past or comes from thinking about the future. It's not actually in the present, not actually in the source of it, not in the present. So, but that's, I would do that on advisement carefully, because for some men, the mindfulness, the quietness of the present can be terrifying. So that's why I often suggest more novelty, doing something new that takes a person's attention away from some of these other sorts of intrusive thoughts, images. So the person is practicing, exercising control of their thinking rather than the thinking being in control of them.
If they're not very interested in the idea of some of the standard things we might do, like mindfulness and relaxation exercises, to introduce a whole range of ideas and present them as things to try out, and it's okay if this doesn't work, it's okay if that doesn't work. It's not trying to take away the expectation that if this doesn't work, trying to take away the understanding that if a particular practice doesn't work for somebody, they're doing it wrong, or there's something extra wrong with them. I think it's just a matter of trying to acknowledge as openly as possible that at different times and for different people in different situations, different techniques and different ideas are going to be helpful. For some men, some of those possibilities might include art making. I've certainly worked with men who found, whether it's working with clay or working with drawing, working with paint, that can be a helpful way for some men to manage difficult and overwhelming feelings. For others it might be physical exercise, and getting back into, whether it's the gym, but it might also be walking on the beach, walking the dog, gardening, doing some physical work. For other men, it might be making music, listening to music. For other men, what's helpful for them are ways of distracting their thoughts from painful and difficult thoughts. So it could be something as simple as watching a favourite TV show, but doing that with an awareness that this is something that's helpful for them to do and helps them manage to do. So, certainly, I think it's, it's helpful for us as workers to offer a whole range of different strategies that have worked for other people, but I think the crucial thing really is to, I suppose, encourage men really to think about these things as things they're doing with an awareness of it's something to care for themselves. That conscious intention, I think, is an important principle.
When people seem to be overwhelmed by their feelings, the thoughts, possibly memories of things that happened in the past, I think one of the things they're often looking for is that you, the person they're talking to, doesn't get overwhelmed at the same time. So I think a prerequisite is, if you're going to do this work, make sure that you're okay with hearing what you get told, and not just hearing what you get told. Make sure that you're okay sitting with people in some of the deepest distress that human beings experience. And if you don't have your own tolerance level for other people's deep distress, it's probably you're probably going to work well in another area, but maybe not this area. So I think one of the prerequisites is the worker's capacity to tolerate someone else's distress and whatever that may provoke in yourself.
Once again, I come back to the issue always of helping a man feel that he's in control when he feels out of control. And often it's about keeping things as simple as you can. So I often use my hands a lot in work, and even when I'm on the phone I describe my hands and what they're doing. So a very good starting point is to say you are feeling like you're out of control and it is controlling you. We're about to turn it over and you are controlling it. Very simple, but a lot of people start to understand this and I say the very essence of you making the first approach, allowing someone to call on your behalf or you calling, you have started that process. So you are starting to be in charge of yourself. You've made a choice. And if I can perhaps just give a number of strategies to answer this question, be practical, because there's a range of things you could talk about. But I do think that the first thing is to help people and help men understand why they're feeling overwhelmed. Some psychoeducation, if you like, or explanation of what has happened to a child or to a person from the time they've been abused is important. I have developed a bit of a model which I call the tunnel of isolation. I get on the whiteboard or the blackboard and I scribble and draw. But this is just helping people understand that the ups and downs of life occur for everybody, but children learn from rubbing up and experiencing the ups and downs. They may have crises in their lives and so on, but they gradually learn from the reactions of their parents, people, peers and so on. When something traumatic happens, particularly like a sexual abuse or sexual assault, which can't be spoken about, has all sorts of societal difficulties, a lot of the thoughts, and when a person either believes that they can't speak up about it or tries to speak and isn't heard or isn't believed, a child will then bury it and put their thoughts and ideas down into this tunnel of isolation. And their learning experiences tend to stay buried and don't get experienced and worn out. And gradually over time, they will hear about the norms in society, about the behaviour that they were involved with, and develop thoughts in the tunnel of isolation around that, which can be quite wrong, but they're untested. They also, through that process, often block feelings and emotions, numb down or forget. So they're not actually experiencing learning to communicate about emotions, to feel emotions in many cases. So in a simple way, I explain this tunnel of isolation of everything being locked down with lots of pressures and arrows coming on the board about numbing, blocking, not feeling, not communicating, not learning how to speak. So the terror of a person who's developed in this way through childhood and adolescence is the terror of feeling anything, or the terror of feeling overwhelmed and everything blowing up, the lid off the Coke bottle, the volcano going off. And that's the sense of overwhelming and the fear of being overwhelmed that can come to people. And most of our clients have experienced this when they overblow with anger, when they get overwhelmed, when they're triggered unexpectedly by something. And they live in terror of this happening. When I draw this on the board and when I talk to people, it seems to make a lot of sense, because they can understand what's happening to them. And then I'm able to give some assurances about, well, we can actually help you develop strategies and techniques to manage this, so that you're not living with this terror of feeling overwhelmed or the actual experience of being overwhelmed. So there's more to that model that I use, but that's probably the essence of that. So I think it's important for men particularly to gain an understanding in the beginning, but you don't necessarily do that in the first or second session, but you come to it. Strategies like grounding are very important. Simple mindfulness, It's very important. I've developed a very simple way of calling two-track thinking for guys, which is using mindfulness after we've taught basically how to focus, the basic strategies of mindfulness, of just focusing on one's breathing or focusing on one's hot cup of coffee and so on, to help them manage thoughts and focus for a short time their thoughts, and then let those other unwanted thoughts or myriad of thoughts go through, to gain a sense of I can control my mind. Many people think this is impossible. I can do it. I can't manage my mind. I can't manage my thoughts. And so by practically proving they can, it's the focusing isn't the difficult part. It's managing those other thoughts that will keep coming, and a lot of men don't understand about accepting and not judging your thoughts and so on. So a couple of things I've developed can be useful, are very practical. It's like, say, here comes another thought. It could be like a bumblebee coming in one door, watch it, go, see it go out the window. It's gone. Oh, here comes another thought. Focus on my cup of coffee or focus on my breathing. Here comes another thought. Okay, another insect going through. Or it could be like a cricket ball. Put it through to the keeper. Just let it go. Here comes that thought, and back to what I'm choosing to focus my mind on right now. Another couple that work, for particularly guys who are dads or mums who are dads, like a naughty child or a little toddler who doesn't know to wait. Mummy, 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 daddy, 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 come on, come on. Wait, say excuse me. It's your turn to wait. When Daddy's finished, he'll talk to you. Back to what I'm talking about or what I'm doing. Okay, I'm ready for you now. So the feeling of being in charge of the thought. Another one that really works for guys is pets. The dog that comes in, jumps up, sit, stay. Focus on what you're doing. Sit. So this notion of I can be in charge of another thought, I can be in charge of something else. And I find those really work for guys. So teaching mindfulness is wonderful, but I think a lot of men need that really practical grab on what to do with all this other stuff that goes in on their heads. So I work with guys to say, well, what works for you? Is there another image? And sometimes that they can develop their own as well. Or they'll come back and say, I like the cricket ball one, or I like the dog. So, and that helps. So that once again, it's a sense of being in control. Exercise is really important in terms of managing oneself. We know that the endorphins pump up and so on, but often you can build that in with a sense of mindfulness, doing active mindfulness. So learning not just to go out and exercise and not think, but to focus one's thoughts on what you want to do. I'm going to have 10 minutes of just concentrating on how my body feels as I walk. Whereas I don't normally, my mind's still doing all this other stuff. No, I'm going to notice the environment I'm in, or I'm going to notice my body, and I'll convert the exercise to something where I'm also controlling my mind. Another strategy which is really good is helping people understand that they will be worried and it's okay. It's a very simple form of the ACT therapy that we do. But just to say it's okay, but I'm going to worry at a certain time. I'm going to make a list of the things, and I'm going to use the principles of distraction if I can, but I will worry at 4 o'clock on a Friday afternoon, and I'll really concentrate, and I might write it all down to myself or something, get it out of my head in a cathartic way, but I'm not allowing myself to be consumed. Another one in terms of emotions, I'll be brief, is emotional. It is a very practical way of pulling back one's overreactions to things. It's a sort of a technique of emotional regulation for oneself. It's a simple behavioural approach where we say to people, you find yourself escalated to 9 out of 10. You've heard a sound in the house at night, it must be someone breaking in. Or I saw someone with red hair, that must be him. You find yourself at 9 out of 10 in anger or in anxiety. Step 1 is recognising that. Step 2, and you can do this on the board, but it's a really good one to use with your hands. Step 1 is recognising. Step 2 is asking yourself, is that really what if I was coping better, or if I was an average man in the street, what would I really feel about that? What might someone else feel? Oh, they might feel 7 out of 10. Okay, can I pull myself down to an 8? So it's a 1, recognise, think, reevaluate. So 1, 2, 3. And I get guys to practice that, and I say it's like learning a new skill. You have to practice this, like mindfulness. But 1, 2, 3. After time, recognise, think, pull back. It starts to be like this. And after a while, and because we work with people with the feelings in their bodies, after a while I get them to say, are you feeling it in your body? And after a while, it should be automatic after a lot of practice, and only a few people achieve this, but it's this feeling. Self-regulate, pull myself down. And I find for a lot of guys that works. They might use it just occasionally, but it's once again feeling that you don't have to stay up there. They walk in being locked into only one way. You can control yourself. So that's just another one that works for people who get very, very peaking responses.